Your phone. Lee, I think you must have. Isn't that like they were using the annual report minister today? Yes, we're waiting for the commissioner. Can anyone indicate from the media group if they can hear us? Can you check, Lee? Good. A very good afternoon, colleagues, members of the media, and members of the public who are joining us from various platforms, be it YouTube, the GCIS channel, and the Competition Commission. Welcome to the official unveiling of the first ever Economic Concentration Report, proudly brought to you by the Competition Commission of South Africa. My name is Siabulela Makunga. I am the spokesperson for the Competition Commission of South Africa. My role today is that of directing the proceedings of this historic event. And without further ado, I would like to extend a special welcome to the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Honorable Mr. Ibrahim Patel. Thank you very much, Minister, for gracing months, and we really appreciate your availability. We understand the hectic schedule that we have to deal with, especially at this time of the year. We are holding this media conference, Minister, just a few days after the World Competition Day, which we celebrated on Sunday. It is quite an exciting thing to us because the issues that we're going to be dealing with today are issues really that deal with the work that the competition, a global village, would have to deal with. And at this juncture, the Competition Commissioner, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonagele, is sitting on my immediate right, is joined by the competition's ever hardworking chief economist, Mr. James Hodge, who is sitting on my far right. Commissioner Bonakele has sanctioned this media briefing for two reasons. And one reason, members of the media and the minister, is that of unveiling the first ever economic concentration report in South Africa, and to hand over officially this report to the Honorable Minister, who is the executive authority responsible for competition matters in cabinet. The report essentially details the state of concentration in South Africa, and it focuses on levels and trends of ownership and control of various sectors in the South African economy. But also, we are alive to the fact that at the time of the release of this report, Honorable Minister, not even a single historically disadvantaged person or groups own or control more than 50% of one economic sector in South Africa, which proves that indeed the levels of inequality, concentration, and skewed levels of ownership and control in our economy continue to grow. Members of the media, I'm a layman on these matters, and I now wish to invite to the fore the Competition Commissioner of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonakele, to give us a full account of the state of concentration and participation in the South African economy. Commissioner Bonakele, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Sia. Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Ibrahim Patel. My fellow leaders from the Competition Commission, particularly our members of EXCO, senior officials from government, including the DTIC, as well as sister departments in the economic cluster, the GCIS, members of the media. Last time we were here, we were announcing the settlement with Vodacom and MTN following a market inquiry that we did. Soon thereafter, Minister, the country was locked down. So I'm not making any prediction. But I was reminded that we didn't have long after that historic announcement, which of course was very timely from the point of view of connectivity and access to communication means, because it became essential during lockdown that everybody could be connected. So we're very proud of that achievement, despite the unfortunate coincidence. South Africa's young democracy is alive to the increasing levels of inequality and slow economic growth, whilst navigating economic recovery during the state of a world pandemic. These are among many of the challenges facing South Africa's economy today. The country's economic levels and trends remain skewed as it doesn't reflect the demographics of South Africa's populace. A growing body of international work has highlighted concerning increases in the concentration in many of the leading global economies over the past 10 to 15 years. Whilst concentration may not necessarily always be bad, that narrative has sought to differentiate between efficient periods of growing concentration and inefficient periods. Generally, efficient periods of growing concentration are associated with tougher price competition, investment, and increasing productivity of leaders, which results in growing shares for efficient leading firms, but which occur of low levels of concentration to begin with. Honorable Minister, inefficient concentration growth occurs where there are entrenched leaders, resulting in lower levels of competition and higher entry barriers, and where concentration is associated with lower investments, higher prices, and lower productivity growth. US studies have also associated recent increased concentration with a lower labor share of GDP, contributing to wealth inequality as the rewards of capital outstrip those of labor. In his thought-provoking article themed, "Is South African Transformation Dead?" David Thomas reminds us of what Istwalande Nelson Mandela said to business leaders on 23 May 1990, that if we are genuinely interested in ending the old social order and bringing in a new order characterized by notions of justice and equity, it is obvious that the economic power relations represented by the reality of the excessive concentration of power in a few white hands have to change. We make this demand not as a result of any imperative that might be said to drive from ideological conviction. We make it because we cannot see how it would be possible to pull our country out of the economic crisis, in part caused and exemplified by wide control of economic power, whilst at the same time, we perpetuate this power. One of these imperatives is to end white domination in all its forms, to de-racialize the exercise of economic power, close quote. Madiba's clarion call placed before South Africans an inevitable path of economic transformation agenda, which remains relevant in today's economic landscape. From Program Director, in the South African context, concentration is of particular concern because it is generally not associated with efficient forms of growing concentration, but rather inefficient forms. The preamble to the Competition Act begins by recognizing that apartheid had left the country with an economy characterized by excessive levels of concentration of ownership and control, as well as lack of participation by all South Africans. The apartheid regime actively promoted national champions in different sectors, developed industrial state-owned enterprise, monopolies, and agricultural cooperatives that were later privatized, and condoned industry cartels in its efforts to promote self-sufficiency and the economic interests of a minority. Whilst the conglomerates were generally unbundled in the initial post-apartheid period, selling off non-core businesses, the individual businesses that were dominating particular industries often remained intact. The Commission previously did a study that attempted to look at concentration, looking at its own major data. And it did confirm that the economy remained concentrated 15 years since the Act was promulgated. This is in spite of substantial growth in the economy over this period, which could have promoted a greater spread of ownership. That research, thankfully, Minister, was the foundation of the amendments to the Act, which were promulgated in 2019. Following the amendments, This study seeks to deepen our understanding of patterns of concentration and participation in the South African economy. And different from what we did a few years ago with our own major data. This study does this through a detailed assessment of both the levels and trends in concentration and participation over the past 5 to 10 years across 178 industries, which is much wider than what we did before. The study has sought to provide measures at a detailed subsector level and across the various layers of the value chain for all major sectors of the economy. This has been achieved through the assistance of more than 80 industry bodies, regulatory bodies, and government departments that collect data on the economy as part of their duties. So it goes beyond just our own data. The study's detailed sectoral analysis is complemented by national data sets to provide broader insights around the level of concentration at a broader sectoral level, the distribution of firm income across firm sizes, the level and trend in the participation of small and medium enterprises, the evolving entry and exit of firms across firm size categories, and the transitioning between firm size categories. Specifically, the study has made use of the administrative tax data based on the South African Revenue Services database. We would like to thank industry role players, organized business, regulatory bodies, and government departments for sharing credible data and insights during the course of this important exercise. Members of the media, by using data sources that are consistently collected by organizations and government, the study is able to consistently examine trends and not just levels of concentration. This is important as it provides insights into the trajectory of different markets. It also means that the study can be updated in future to continue tracking those trends and provide a useful series. The main study itself is lengthy at over 400 pages. For this reason, there is also a summary report that we will share with you, which seeks to highlight some overall insights across the multiple markets that are studied, as well as quick takeaways for individual markets. The main findings of the study will be outlined by the chief economist, James Hodge, who has been introduced. And I would like to take the opportunity, Minister, to really thank James and the team for undertaking this comprehensive research on behalf of the Commission. I say it without a doubt that without James's leadership of this project, I am doubtful that we would have been able to undertake work of this magnitude. Program Director, I will in a moment invite James to share with us detailed findings and recommendations of this report. But before I do so, I also do want to sincerely thank Minister Patel for placing competition policy at the center of government policy in South Africa today. So what we see, Minister, across the world with economic challenges and challenges of industrialization that face not just the developing world, but also Europe, especially in the context of digital markets, that competition policy often becomes a victim because many cannot see its immediate benefits in this quest for growth and industrialization. And so we are really grateful that in South Africa, you seek to balance all of these policy instruments. And it really gives us a chance as competition authorities to show what we can do. And we hope that through this study, we will make a lasting contribution to the understanding of competition in South Africa, and more particularly, understanding our markets, the participation of small and medium enterprises, the participation of historically disadvantaged persons, as well as the trends in concentration over time. So I thank you very much for affording us such an opportunity and to present this within Cabinet. We will update this report biannually in order to track the trends in the market concentration and participation in order to inform our work and hopefully to also help with government priorities and policies. Thanks very much. May I now ask James to give more details on the study.
Thank you, Commissioner, Honourable Minister, and members of the media. As the Commissioner indicated, the report goes to over 400 pages, but there is a summary report. And I'm just going to highlight some of the cross-sectoral and cross-market aspects that we've highlighted in that summary report. So the first is that there is a persistence of high concentration, as we confirmed with our earlier study. Markets were deemed to be highly concentrated if 3 firms had more than a 50% share of the total revenue in that sector, and highly concentrated with a dominant firm if a single firm also held more than 35%. So the study found that 40% of the markets that we looked at were highly concentrated with a dominant firm, and a further 29%. So in total, 69% of markets were highly concentrated. 21% of these markets were moderately concentrated and only 10% were unconcentrated. So these findings do confirm the earlier findings of the need for the recent amendments to the Act in order to address persistent concentration in the economy. The markets that were identified as highly concentrated, just to illustrate, a large number came from farming inputs, your seeds, seed treatment, fertilizer, storage, animal feed, fungicides, insecticides, your agro-processing, such as grain, fisheries, ostrich, bread, poultry, sugar, the so-called sin industries, alcohol, gambling, and cigarettes, healthcare, medical schemes, administration, pathology, hospitals, and pharmacy, communications, your mobile, fiber to the home, publishing and broadcasting, your upstream steel value chains from the mining and steel production, and your chemicals as well. Transport sector in terms of airlines and vehicles, and finance in terms of all aspects of insurance and banking. The second major finding is that highly concentrated markets were becoming more concentrated over time, the kind of inefficient concentration that the Commissioner highlighted. So what we found was that tracking over a period of 5 to 10 years, that highly concentrated markets with a dominant firm were 3 times more likely to have seen increases in concentration over that period than reductions in concentration. And this is in stark contrast to unconcentrated or moderately concentrated markets, where there is a greater likelihood that they become less concentrated over time. This finding is also consistent with the notion that dominant firms are more capable of raising entry barriers and excluding rivals, which may reinforce their dominance over time. And whilst it confirms the need to focus enforcement on markets with dominant firms, it also suggests that we need proactive measures to ensure that markets do not become concentrated in the first place. In this regard, the study does also note that there's growing concentration in government licensed sectors such as fisheries, retail pharmacy, renewable energy, and gambling. And there may be more scope to actually address this through changes in the regulatory regime and the licensing regime in these markets. The third major finding is that growing participation in the economy by SMEs remains a considerable challenge in South Africa. We made use of the SARS administrative tax database for all tax-paying firms in the economy, and we found that whilst SMEs represented 95% of firms, they only represented 24% of firm revenue in the economy. Where they did contribute disproportionately was to employment creation, with a 38% share of employment.
But these figures are in stark contrast to the OECD average, where small businesses constitute 99% of firms, but more importantly, over 50 to 60% of value add in the economy. So in South Africa, it is half that amount. And this comparison highlights the extent to which participation remains a considerable challenge in the economy. The SARS data over time also shows that SMEs not only suffer from quite high exit rates, even by global standards, but that the exit rates have been increasing over the last 10 years, even though there's some promising developments around medium firms growing into larger ones. If we look at a more granular level and the data we collected from industry organizations and regulators, then the study found that 48% of the markets had fewer than 20 firms or participants, and 75% of the markets we looked at had fewer than 100 participants. And concerning in this respect is the trend that only 24% of these markets were seeing growing participation levels. Predictably, highly concentrated sectors tend to have fewer participants, but the study also found that there were many highly concentrated sectors where there existed a sizable number of firms that held a small share and just seemed unable to scale and challenge the incumbents. So this does again confirm the need to focus on participation in the economy as per the amendments, and also the removal of barriers to expansion, not just entry, in order to create a stronger competition regime in the country. This would include work that's being done through enforcement, through market inquiries, and also broader economic policy. The fourth area is that there's a high degree of inequality in the distribution of firm income, which naturally stems from the low levels of SME participation. But again, using the SARS database, the study was able to determine the actual distribution of firm income, much like we look at the distribution of household income. The study found that it is highly inequitable, with the top 10% of firms holding over 86% of total turnover, whilst the bottom 50% held only 1.6% of total turnover. And this has barely changed over time. There are some exceptions, such as in catering and accommodation or personal services, but there are also many sectors where we would expect a much stronger showing from smaller firms, but that's not the case. So this might be in retail, motor trade, wholesale, and agriculture, which have similar levels of concentration as others. The study did calculate a Gini coefficient, which is the typical measure used to measure income inequality in households, and that came in at 0.84 for distribution of firm income, which is considerably higher than the 0.63 we have for households. So this does highlight, I think, quite well the high degree of inequality in the commercial side of the economy. The fifth area, and moving to more of a sectoral focus, the food value chain showed particularly concerning levels and trends in concentration. The study found that there's a high level of concentration for inputs, and I'd indicated earlier that inputs featured strongly amongst the highly concentrated sectors, but also on the processing side. But to give you some illustration on the input side, the top 3 firms in seed treatment, fungicides, animal genetics, fertilizer, and forestry control anywhere between 60 and 90% of all inputs. So that's just 3 firms. At the other end of the value chain and the processes, the top 3 processes for dairy, sugar, and grains control anywhere from 50 to 80% of processing. And even where there is more participation, such as in milling, the top 3 firms still control a very high share. What this appears to us is that the concentration of inputs and processing may have placed small and emerging farmers in a margin squeeze through high or discriminatory pricing for inputs, coupled with lower prices for their outputs. And that outcome means that farmers and growers need to get large or get out of this industry, which appears to be happening at an alarming rate. So the study found that there's been a sharp decline in the number of commercial farming units over the past 5 years, even though output has continued to grow, which shows that farms are getting considerably larger and small farms are exiting. So the study found that 24% of grain farming units were reduced over this period. There was a reduction of 31% in dairy farming units, 56% in commercial cattle, and 24% in commercial pig farming. And the reason we've highlighted this particular concern is that the market structure is clearly adverse to small growers, and this is likely to undermine land reform initiatives aimed at growing the share of Black emerging farmers in the country. Furthermore, the market structure also undermines the potential for greater job creation and participation by small firms within agriculture. And this is an area where we hold a comparative advantage and where there is scope for growth, because large firms tend to become more mechanized and reward fewer and fewer individuals, excluding broader participation and job creation. We do note that in areas where there have been specific efforts to bring in small Black growers, such as in sugar, the study found that there are clearly barriers to these growers scaling and becoming large. So in sugarcane growing, 95% of the farmers are Black, but only 1.4 considered large. And even then that number has almost halved in a few years. But also importantly, collectively, these farmers only constitute 19% of sugarcane output. And the 3.7% of very large white-owned growers accounted for 65% of output. So this highlights specifically that challenge of transforming the agricultural sector and scaling in addition to entry. Sixth, and staying with the sectoral focus, the retail sector is relatively concentrated across all the major categories. So if we look, for instance, at national grocery chains, the top 4 account for 58% of all grocery retail sales. The top 5 national clothing retailers account for 58% of clothing retail sales, and 51% of building or home improvement retail is accounted for by the top 4 national retailers only. We also observe a very rapid consolidation in retail pharmacy, with the top 2 national chains growing their share from 39% to 49% in just 3 years. The Commission's recent grocery retail market inquiry found that not only did the exclusive leases keep out small grocery competitors, but that developments and mall developments and the leases that they issued often required that 75 to 80% of the gross lettable area was released to national chains. And this is likely to be one of the root causes of such concentration beyond just grocery itself into the other areas of retail. We have acted on the exclusive leases and reached agreements with the major chains, but the reservation of lettable area for national chains is something that also needs to end. Lastly, just to highlight some of the concentration levels and sectors likely to be key in the recovery of the economy. In infrastructure and the construction sector, we've seen many firms enter business rescue or exit. And recently, just 3 firms accounted for 70% or more of the major civil and building contracts valued over 200 million or more. In steel, the top 3 producers supplied over 70% of steel products in construction and mining, with only 4 firms or fewer capable of producing steel for roofing, cables, and pipes. There are 3 PVC and HDPE pipe producers that have a share of over 80%. In energy, half the wind and solar power is generated by the top 3 firms. The top 3 refineries and LPG suppliers have a share of over 65% of their markets. In communications, we're well aware of the concentration in mobile, but in fiber to the home, just 3 firms provide 3/4 of all home fiber connections, and 80% of consumers are connected by the top 4 ISPs. In healthcare, we're aware of that the top 3 firms control over 70% of acute hospitals and open schemes and administration. But pathology, including our COVID PCR tests, are dominated by 3 firms, and in most provinces, only 2 dominate, as is the case with radiology as well. So, Commissioner, that concludes the summary of the findings, and I'm now going to hand back over to you to go through the recommendations.
Thank you very much, James. So what James has presented is that we have a problem. I've situated it within the global trend, which means we are not alone. We have fellow travelers towards this journey of higher concentration. But also we also highlight that in South Africa, we are facing a legacy issue, which makes our problem even more serious and more persistent. There are 2 broad conclusions that emerge from the study, which require strategic policy considerations. Firstly, the study shows that once markets are concentrated, as James said, the trend is towards more concentration. And so more deliberate action is required to change that trajectory. Secondly, that the South African economic conditions and structure are hostile to small and medium enterprises and therefore undermine inclusion and job creation potential of the economy. Changes have been made to the Competition Act, as I've said, in February 2020 to address these challenges, and the Commission has started implementing on this mandate. In particular, the amendments bring about the following significant changes: the introduction of the contraventions for abuse of buyer power, which is something new in South Africa, and price discrimination against small and medium enterprises and HDIs with a lower fair trading or impeding participation threshold. I might here pause and say that we were doing an assessment this morning of this provision, Minister, and we are finding that there are very few and in many sectors, no complaints coming from small businesses. So this is part of the challenge that we have to deal with in implementation. There was also the strengthening of market inquiries to enable the competition authorities to impose remedial action, including divestiture and interventions that promote competition. For the first time, the introducing structure and not only firm conduct as a focal point for competition authorities, especially within market inquiries, leads to new possibilities. And lastly, there was an introduction of more stringent regulations of creeping measures. This is where measures are on their own too small to trigger a regulatory intervention. But when you look at measures cumulatively, you can see the impact that they have, and you therefore can, with these amendments, intervene. The findings of the study also point clearly to other initiatives the Commission needs to undertake at a broad level, and also which markets might require greater scrutiny within major control, the investigation, initiation of investigations, as well as market inquiries. These measures will be announced soon. We are in consultation with the Minister as required by law to discuss what market inquiry or market inquiries will be undertaken in response to these studies. I should say that I'm not only talking about the things that we are still to do. There is work that we're currently doing. We have recently published guidelines in the auto sector for the aftermarket so that you can open it up to independence for service and repair of cars. We have reached settlement agreements with two large grocery retailers, Shoprite Checkers and Pick n Pay, to end exclusive lease agreements in shopping malls. We have launched the market inquiry into online commerce platforms for consumer goods, delivery services, holiday rental apps, and so on, to address barriers to participation and concentration. We also do recommend that in light of these challenges, there is a need for a government-wide competition policy that would ensure coordination and systematic approach to competition policy across all spheres of government. It is amazing how, for an example, even local government impacts on business at a local level. And so government policy, we're saying, must go beyond just the national sphere and also touch on what provinces and municipalities do, and ensure that government action does not just favor incumbents and work against inclusion. I'm going to make an example. It may sound silly, but this is real, that in local government, you have a situation where a competitor who is a a supplier of electric engineering services, has to certify all other engineering companies that seek to do business within that municipality. And this is established practice across large metros in the country. In respect of this coordinated approach, the study recommends the following actions. First, that the concentration study be used to aid prioritizing and initiatives within government and to provide a benchmark for target setting around deconcentration of the economy and enhanced participation. Second, to the point that James was making, that agricultural value chain warrant an immediate prioritization and focus for a coordinated government approach in order to support smaller producers, as well as the broader land reform initiative, which will also contribute, we believe, to the job creation potential of that sector. And of course, we also know that the sector is very important for food security and in the fight against poverty. Third, that there is a greater coordination required between regulators and public entities responsible for issuing of licenses and concessions, as this will ensure consistent approach to broadening the participation in these sectors. We do think that there is a possibility of laws requiring concurrency in decisions such as the transfer of ownership in these regulated sectors, because sometimes the regulators and government departments are not really attuned to assessing the implications of a change in ownership. And we have many examples of this. Someone gets allocated, issued with a hospital license, and James was complaining about concentration, and then they go and sell that license immediately to one of the incumbents. So that is something that requires attention across all regulated sectors. And consideration needs to be given to more systematic funding and support for scaling SMMEs and HDIs, including focusing on DFIs, development finance institutions, on scaling competitors. Consideration also be given to changes in the regulatory framework for the private sector funding in order to understand and influence its patterns. As I have indicated earlier, this is the beginning. We are going to see a more clearer picture of how these efforts are effective over the years as this study gets repeated. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Commissioner James. Colleagues in the media, there you have a comprehensive and a detailed report on the study on the concentration of the economy. In the main, really highlighting what we would call areas of concentration to deconcentrate the economic landscape of the Republic of South Africa, but also highlighting the findings and recommendations as to what needs to be done. It does become clear that this is not the work that the Commission alone can achieve. It is a widespread collective effort. Commissioner says here that when the study was done, there were fellow travelers, like the regulators that were mentioned, the industrial players who had to provide credible information so as to ensure that that which is being now made available through our website, which is the concentration study. I do wish to invite my colleagues to make sure that the study is now being released officially on the website and other platforms. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I now wish to call and invite our photographers. We are now getting to the climax of this historic event, where I would invite the Commissioner for Competition in South Africa, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonakele, to officially hand over the 408 pages report, which is Honorable Minister, the work that has taken just over a year to complete. I do wish to ask Commissioner James, when he wraps up this session, to acknowledge the colleagues that you have worked with in this important report. Ladies and gentlemen, we now witness the handover of the official first ever economic concentration report by the Competition Commissioner, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonakele, to the executive authority of the Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition, Honorable Ibrahim Patel. There is a request for the Commissioner and the Honorable Minister to come to the fore. James, you may join the door. I'm in your hands, colleagues. Minister in the middle. James on the far right. We must just observe the regulations of COVID-19. We've got our masks on. There is no touching or handshakes. Thank you very much, Commissioner Bonakele. Fly a little bit. Yes. Yes. The Honorable Minister is receiving this report officially for the first time. It is the hope of the Commission that the Honorable Minister will share this report with his colleagues in Cabinet, but also look at the few recommendations that are made, especially that of calling on government to reconsider its policy framework, and not only at a national level, but also at all levels of government. The Commissioner has made a very important example as how the Commission has observed some of the anti-competitive practices at the local government level, which to me brings about a lot of work for the Commission and all other regulators in the space of deconcentrating the economy in the Republic of South Africa. At this stage, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite Honorable Ibrahim Patel, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, to react to the official handover of the report. Minister, the floor is yours. I don't know if you will be able to squeeze in. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Let me just sanitize. Not an expert.
Thank you, Sia. Good afternoon to Commissioner Bonakele, to Chief Economist James Hodge, to members of the Competition Commission, members of the media. I wish to thank the Competition Commission for the detailed work that it has done on economic concentration, and I officially accept the main report and the summary report that has been presented to me here today. It's a very substantial report. It looks almost the size of those old